Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Emily Sophia, aka Mighty Sophia, here to break down for you guys the third episode of the first season of HBO's Westworld. We are on the episode that is entitled The Stray, so don't y'all stray away, but I shall warn you before we dive into the mad thick of things that this will be a very spoilery review. So, shortly, we will get to all of those details, but as just a minor disclaimer here at the top of this review, this video is essentially the beginning of the conversation. What I normally do is I will watch and consume an episode, and about 10 or 15 minutes afterwards, sit down and vlog it out for you guys. So inevitably, there are some details that I am going to miss. There are probably some questions that I am not going to articulate or observations that I will not express in this review because unfortunately, I am just one human being. So you guys, please, I implore you, join me in analyzing the ever-living hell out of this series because this episode represents yet another cram-packed cerebral installment in what is a very smart and exciting and complex show. So, now, here we go with the spoilers. The way I'm going to begin is I'm going to walk you guys through some of the major overarching themes that I personally noticed. So, because that's the best way for me to ingest television of this caliber. So, one of the, well, by and large, what was super intriguing about this episode, about The Stray, is we get more insight into the motivations of the minds behind Westworld. We see what different creators such as Ford and Bernard Lowe are doing with the hosts, and we see kind of more of the inner workings of their minds. There's less of an emphasis that is placed on the experiences of the guests, which, I mean, makes a lot of sense because really the meat of matters lies in what's really happening here. What is the bigger picture? So it's interesting to contrast those really lofty, grand ideas and concepts with the little adventures and shenanigans of the guests. But this episode hit on some really heavy themes and topics and ideas that are going to continue to be unraveled throughout the rest of the series. And one thing that really stuck out to me was the idea of containment versus evolution, and how mistakes are inherent to the process of evolution. And namely, we get to see how Robert Ford is attempting to sort of ground one of the hosts, that being Teddy, whereas Bernard Lowe is trying to liberate Dolores and open up new horizons for her. And it's super intriguing. I think that my favorite aspect of the episode was getting to see more deeply into the motivations with which Ford and Lowe are approaching things, and to see how their road is beginning to diverge. They're going in two very different directions with regards to what they even want to do with the hosts, and that is quite a terrifying notion. Because see, you know, of all the people who I would suspect to be trying to test things to destruction and expand horizons and get closer to consciousness, I would expect to see more of that coming from Ford at this point. But we see that Bernard Lowe is in a very emotionally vulnerable state, and that is kind of compelling him to do these illicit, clandestine things with Dolores. Namely, he is trying to atone for his shortcomings as a bereft father who lost his son Charlie. And so it's almost as if he sees in particular Dolores as one who he can sort of live out. I'm trying to think of how to explain this, but he realizes that he was trying to shelter his son while his son was still alive. And now with Dolores, he has the opportunity to let her go free. You know, she's asking him in these secret conversations that they're having, you know, did I make a mistake? Is that why you want to change me? And then he's recalling an instance where he was trying to protect his son. His son didn't want to let go of him while he was learning how to swim in the pool, and likewise, Bernard didn't want him to let go. And so they were kind of just locked onto each other, stuck and static and sticking to the script where there is no ability to learn, no ability to grow. And so what Bernard is kind of doing here, contrary to what Ford tells him to do, he is making the classic mistake of conferring humanity to Dolores, kind of seeing her almost as a daughter figure, with whom he can explore the possibilities of evolution. He can let her swim free and see where this path is going to take her. So he is very emotionally driven, whereas at least at this point, it appears on the surface that Ford is more logically driven. However, he is also kind of wrapped up in his own capricious whims. Like at the beginning of his conversation with Bernard about Arnold and the cognitive voices and all of that craziness, at the beginning of that conversation, I recall that Ford was talking about how he got caught up in his inspiration, you know, so inspiration is also a big pervasive theme in the episode, as is evidenced by the stray, the woodcutter, who seemed to have wandered off to go look at the stars, you know? And then as a little Walking Dead reference, he ends up looking at the flowers. Wink, wink. But anyway, so there's this idea of caution versus imagination too, which is one that I think is very familiar to all of our life experiences. But yet again, interesting to see how Ford is kind of trying to transform Teddy's formless guilt into something more substantial, and that leads to the story of Wyatt, this crazy mercenary who sees himself as this god among men, that all things belong to him, and now he has this band of savages, and, you know, grounding things is where Ford is at. Whereas Bernard is keeping secrets, going behind people's backs and behind closed doors to be able to find some sort of peace and resolution in the situation of losing his son. And he has his own guilt. So another big theme is that of atonement and the way that grief is processed too. That was something really fascinating to see, how that was not only manifested in the stories of the hosts, but also in the people who are creating them and setting their paths before them or trying to unleash them. And now I'm super excited for next week, because hopefully all of you stuck around for the trailer, because if you don't watch the trailers, I don't want to spoil anything from those for you guys, because I know some people who just want to go episode by episode. But skip the next 30 seconds or so, because now Bernard wants Dolores to try out the maze of all things. Okay, so now this just begs so many questions. Like, is the maze kind of Ford's thing? Is it something that's shared with Lo? Like, whose brainchild was that in particular? It would seem very strange if that was something that Ford wasn't involved in, because he's in the process of rehauling a bunch of stuff and creating his own storylines. But whoa, baby, things are just shifting in an infinite array of directions. And it was also really great to get to hone in on what was happening with the hosts in this episode, because we get those deja vu moments where we see that most of the characters are still kind of in their expected loops, but now there are questions being asked of who they want to be and who they really are, and the way that Bernard and Ford are both approaching those issues, because they're both dealing with those things, but yet it seems that the effects of their actions and their decisions and their pokings and proddings and creations, they're going to be vastly different, and I think could lead to a very cataclysmic confrontation between these men. So what do you guys think of that situation and that particular dynamic between creators? Of course, I should mention the stuff with Arnold, because we go from not only the idea of this this contagion that is spreading from host to host, the issues that were manifested in Abernathy and Walter, I believe, is the other murderous host. The idea that in the early stages of creating the hosts, the way that they tried to get, or at least the way that Arnold wanted them to achieve consciousness, was through this external voice, and talking about how it is that the hosts are even able to think. And Ford is talking about the safeguards that they're trying to put in place in order to keep things from going totally unchecked and getting super crazy. But we see that Dolores is actually one who is hearing the voice. And it sounds like she was hearing Bernard asking, "Do you remember?" So we're trying to peel back the layers here to see where it all begins. There's this inception level business of like the seed has been planted, and we see the roots that are spreading through the soil, and we see what's happening on the surface, the plant life that is blooming and taking shape. But yeah, it's really brilliant and freaky to watch unfold, and to see Dolores getting to go on this path where she is expressing her aspirations. She's able to look into the past in order to make decisions about her future. She, like, when she actually is finally able to shoot one of the men who comes after her at her house, she recalls an earlier confrontation with the man in black. And I want to see the rest of that memory played out, because we keep seeing the man in black appearing in the memories of these different characters, and his role is, whoa boy, is that stuff getting crazy. I have so many questions, and I feel like if I just sat down for like an hour or two and hashed everything out, then maybe I would have some of the answers. But as I'm trying to sit here and put the puzzle together, the picture that I'm trying to use to guide me in joining all of these different pieces, like, the pieces are constantly shifting and evolving before my eyes. And it's so delightfully frustrating because I love a show that manages to be just understandable enough, but also keeps me on my toes. And that is how I feel as I'm trying to rummage around through the mess of my brain to explain this for you guys. But yeah, she at the end hears a voice saying, "Kill him." And then she does. And now is that her own? It's not in her own voice that she's hearing that thought. So arguably that is a remnant of Arnold's code that's coming through. And it's like, okay, where's Arnold? Like, he got killed in the park, but is he still somehow in the system? What's he got to do with the Man in Black? Like, is it the Man in Black's journey that we are supposed to be following, or is he actually part of the maze to lure other hosts into the maze? If this sounds like totally stupid, you can definitely judge me. That's completely fine. Again, just the beginning of the conversation. If I'm totally off base, I want you to address your thoughts on those matters. But I'm getting all conspiratorial up in here, ladies and gents, because that is just the kind of effect that this show has on my mind. The situation with Dolores finally being able to use the gun, like, it's the where there's a will, there's a way sort of principle. But it's fascinating because Elsie Hughes and Ashley Stubbs, the two employees who go off to retrieve the rogue woodcutter, they talk about weapons privileges and how certain hosts are not able to use certain tools of violence, and how that is something that has led to some of the hosts getting caught in certain loops and things of that nature. But we see that is it as simple as just this on-off switch, like trying to unspool the cognitive processes of the hosts it's a journey through the minds of the creators, certainly. And it would definitely seem that Arnold's fascination with creating consciousness is potentially going to undermine everything that Ford has been working for. But we don't even know what that is yet, because he's got a whole another thing going on, and he seems to understand very well what his colleague put in place. But yeah, it does seem to be this incredibly unstoppable and contagious force. Creation begets creation begets creation. And that's part of what makes this all so dizzying, you know? Other themes, of course, now that I'm kind of on the subject, is creation versus replication. Ford talked about how their early host models passed the Turing test, and yet for people like Arnold and arguably Bernard Lowe as well, replication isn't good enough. And in fact, there are other employees at Westworld headquarters who have themselves become seduced by the idea of consciousness and of humanness. For instance, there's that one point where Ford admonishes one of his employees for covering the unclothed host and trying to preserve its modesty. But Ford really tries to drive home the idea that there is nothing that the host can feel that they do not tell it to feel. But now there are these elements of self-determination, Dolores's journey towards self-discovery. There's imagination, there's memory, there's the ability to use things from the past to make new decisions that otherwise could never be realized and could never happen. And so I love that the weapons privileges thing sounds like just this basic mechanic, and yet now here is Dolores who is unlocking that. She was trying to use the gun earlier when after Teddy defended her honor against a couple of unruly hosts who were looking for a good time and then realized that she was too much of a challenge. And Teddy insinuates that maybe she wasn't meant to pull the trigger. And he says that as something that's more in character, or what we understand of his character, but clearly somebody else has got a different design and intention for her. I also love that the imaginativeness, is that even a word? I don't know, of the rogue woodcutter is manifested as him carving the Orion constellation into his pieces. And that is such a compelling thing, that these hosts that are supposed to be created for the enjoyment of the guests are now able to chase after their own whims. But then again, so are Bernard and Ford. Oh, good Lord, is this going to be a messy process? I'm looking forward to seeing how it is that Elsie and Ashley are going to debrief their superiors on what went down there in the wilderness. And I very much enjoyed the new narrative with Wyatt, and how it was that Ford was able to sort of get Teddy to create that story too, and then it comes to life, because all it seems that Ford had to do was say, yeah, you remember that guy Wyatt? And then Teddy sits down and he's like, oh yeah, let me tell you about Wyatt. He was my friend. He was my partner. We did all this, and then he got all these crazy ideas. And so there's this sort of like collaborative creative process, and this dichotomy between Ford and Teddy versus Bernard and Dolores that just I really got wrapped up in this week, and I hope that you guys found it equally as compelling too. Getting to see how caution is thrown to the wind, and what the broader implications of those things are going to be. I'm now starting to take more of an interest in sort of the subterfuge that's going on at headquarters and at the corporate level, and seeing those parallels between the increasingly less idealistic world of Westworld, and then, you know, the long dark hallways and chrome of Westworld, where all of these employees and engineers and creatives are trying to understand themselves and further themselves, and you know, God complexes are gonna be running rampant around here in no time. So there's so much more that I want to get into, and I took all of these ridiculous notes, but I'm gonna have to wrap it up here, ladies and gentlemen. So I hope that wasn't all complete and utter nonsense, and that you enjoyed this review. I have a playlist of all my other reviews, and of course I will be continuing to build onto my TV reviewing content, and hopefully video game reviewing content as well. So thank you guys so much for watching. Anything I forgot, bring it up in the comments below. And as always, I will be back before you know it.